The Whitmore estate sat nestled in the rolling mountains of western Appalachia, a sprawling Victorian mansion that cast long shadows across the valley below. Built in 1847 by coal baron Jeremiah Whitmore, the house had witnessed 4 generations of Whitmores, and a curious pattern that townsfolk whispered about in hushed tones. Sarah Penbrook arrived at the estate on a crisp October morning in 1891, her carriage wheels crunching over fallen leaves as she approached the imposing iron gates. The young journalist from Richmond had convinced her editor to let her investigate the strange tales surrounding the Whitmore women, specifically how every daughter's marriage had ended with the death of her husband within a year of their wedding day. "You must be Miss Penbrook," a stern voice called out as Sarah descended from the carriage. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the family matriarch, stood on the marble steps of the mansion. At 63, she remained an imposing figure, dressed in mourning black despite being widowed for over 20 years. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah said, extending her hand. Eleanor's grip was cold and firm. "I'm only entertaining your visit because our family name has been unfairly tarnished by superstitious nonsense," Eleanor replied. "Come inside. My daughter Rebecca will join us shortly." The interior of the Whitmore mansion was as opulent as Sarah had imagined, mahogany paneling, crystal chandeliers, and family portraits lining the grand staircase. Yet despite the warm fires burning in the hearths, a persistent chill seemed to permeate the air. "Our family history is one of remarkable success," Eleanor began as they settled in the drawing room. "My husband's grandfather built this estate from nothing. The Whitmores have been pillars of this community for generations. And yet," Sarah ventured carefully, "there's the matter of the pattern." Eleanor's face hardened. "Coincidences, nothing more. Life in these mountains is harsh. Accidents happen. 6 bridegrooms in 3 generations, all dead within a year of marriage," Sarah countered gently. "That seems beyond coincidence, Mrs. Whitmore." Before Eleanor could respond, the drawing-room doors opened to reveal a young woman in her early 20s. Rebecca Whitmore had the family's characteristic features: high cheekbones, deep-set eyes, and a graceful poise that spoke of careful upbringing. "Miss Penbrook, my daughter Rebecca," Eleanor introduced them tersely. "Please forgive my tardiness," Rebecca said, her voice soft but clear. "I was tending to some matters in the East Wing." Sarah noticed Rebecca's sleeve was stained with what appeared to be dust or ash. The young woman quickly tucked her hand away when she caught Sarah looking. "Rebecca is to be married next month," Eleanor announced, "to Mr. Thomas Grant, son of Judge Grant from Charleston." Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "I wouldn't have expected, given the family history." Rebecca's smile was serene, almost unsettling. "You mean the supposed curse, that my husband-to-be is doomed?" She laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the high-ceilinged room. "I assure you, Miss Penbrook, I love Thomas dearly. Nothing will happen to him." As they spoke, Sarah became aware of a portrait hanging above the fireplace, a stern-faced man with piercing eyes that seemed to follow her movements. "My father, Jeremiah Whitmore," Eleanor explained, noticing Sarah's gaze. "He built our family's fortune in the coal mines." "The miners in town tell a different story," Sarah said carefully. "They say he built it on the backs of the dead." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Eleanor's face became a mask of cold fury. "Perhaps we should show you the grounds," Rebecca interjected smoothly. "You'll want to see the chapel where I'll be married. It's where all Whitmore weddings have taken place since the estate was built." As they walked through the garden toward the small stone chapel, Sarah felt a growing sense of unease. The sky had darkened, and fog was rolling in from the mountains, enveloping the estate in a ghostly shroud. "Tell me, Miss Penbrook," Rebecca asked quietly when they were out of her mother's earshot, "do you believe in family obligations, in debts that must be paid?" "What kind of debts?" Sarah asked. Rebecca's eyes reflected the growing darkness. "Some bargains can't be broken, not even by love." As they reached the chapel door, Sarah noticed something etched into the stone archway, symbols that didn't appear to be Christian or any religion she recognized. "Old mountain folk markings," Rebecca explained dismissively, "from before the chapel was properly consecrated." But Sarah had spent time researching Appalachian folklore before her visit. Those weren't benign symbols. They were warnings. The next morning, Sarah ventured into the small mining town of Coalvale that sat in the shadow of the Whitmore estate. The main street was muddy from recent rain, and men in soot-stained clothes trudged between the company store and the saloon. She decided to investigate the local perspective on the Whitmore curse before returning to the estate for dinner that evening. The bell above the door jingled as Sarah entered Hartley's general store. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. "You must be the journalist staying up at the Whitmore place," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "News travels fast here." "I'm researching the Whitmore family history," Sarah confirmed. "I understand they've owned the mines for generations." Mr. Hartley glanced around nervously, though the store was empty except for an elderly woman examining fabric bolts in the corner. "Might not want to dig too deep into that history, miss. Some things are best left buried." "Like what happened to the husbands?" Sarah pressed. Hartley's hands trembled slightly as he reorganized items on the counter. "Accidents, they say. All of them. Jonathan Whitmore, Eleanor's husband, fell down a mine shaft in '70. Before him, Eleanor's sister's husbands met similar fates. One crushed by falling timber, another found frozen in the woods, the third drowned in the river despite being a strong swimmer. And before that generation, same story with Jeremiah's sisters," Hartley whispered. 3 daughters, 3 dead husbands. It goes back to old Jeremiah's own marriage. The elderly woman approached the counter, placing a bolt of black fabric down. "Making another mourning dress for up at the big house, Mr. Hartley," she announced loudly. "Miss Rebecca will need one soon enough, won't she?" "Mrs. Dawson," Hartley warned, but the old woman turned her rheumy eyes to Sarah. "You're looking into the curse, ain't you, girl? I remember when Jeremiah Whitmore came to these mountains. Wasn't nothing here but poor folk in the old ways. He wanted the coal under our hills, but the mountains don't give up their treasures without payment. Mrs. Dawson was the midwife who delivered most of the Whitmore children," Hartley explained, looking uncomfortable. "I delivered them, and I've watched each generation follow the same path," the old woman continued. "Jeremiah made a bargain with something that dwells in the deep mines, something older than the hills themselves." Sarah's journalistic instincts were piqued. "What kind of bargain?" "Wealth and power for his bloodline," Mrs. Dawson whispered, leaning closer. Her breath smelled of tobacco and mint. "But there was a price. The mountain spirit demands a sacrifice for each generation that profits from its riches." "A sacrifice? You mean the husbands?" Mrs. Dawson nodded solemnly. "A life given willingly through marriage bonds, then taken by the mountain within a year. That's the pattern, miss. That's the price of Whitmore wealth." Hartley cleared his throat loudly. "Mrs. Dawson tells tales, Miss Penbrook. Mountain superstitions, nothing more." But the old woman wasn't finished. "You've seen the chapel up at the estate? The markings above the door aren't Christian symbols. They're the old language, binding the bargain. Every Whitmore daughter must marry, and every husband must die. It's been that way since Jeremiah's time." "That's enough, Mrs. Dawson," Hartley interrupted firmly. "It's all right," Sarah assured him. "I'm interested in local folklore as much as facts." After leaving the store, Sarah visited the town records office, where the clerk reluctantly allowed her to examine death certificates for the Whitmore sons-in-law. Each document listed a different cause: accidents, sudden illness, even one apparent suicide. But the pattern was undeniable. No husband had survived longer than 11 months after his wedding day. As dusk approached, Sarah made one final stop at St. Paul's Church on the edge of town. The elderly pastor, Father Sullivan, was lighting candles when she entered. "I wondered if you might visit," he said, without turning around. "Most who investigate the Whitmore story eventually find their way here." "Do you believe in the curse, Father?" Sarah asked. The priest sighed heavily. "I believe in evil, Miss Pembroke. Not the metaphorical kind, but tangible darkness that can take root in a family, in a place." He finally faced her, his expression grave. "I've served this parish for 43 years. I've watched 3 generations of Whitmore brides lead their grooms to slaughter. Surely you don't mean they knowingly—" "I can't say what they know or don't know," Father Sullivan interrupted, "but I know this. Jeremiah Whitmore came here a poor man and became rich overnight after exploring certain caves beneath what is now his property. The indigenous people who lived here before settlers arrived would not enter those caves. They said something slept there that should not be awakened." The priest moved to a dusty bookshelf and retrieved a leather-bound journal. "This belonged to the first pastor of this church. He documented the strange events that followed Jeremiah's sudden wealth, the unexplained deaths in the mines, the symbols that appeared on trees and rocks around the property, and the condition Jeremiah's wife developed after their marriage. Sleepwalking episodes where she would be found digging in the earth with bloody fingers, speaking in a language no one recognized." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as Father Sullivan continued. "Most telling is what happens after each husband dies. The mines produce record yields in the following months, as if the mountain is pleased with its sacrifice." As darkness fell outside the church windows, the priest's weathered face looked ghostly in the candlelight. "You're returning to the estate tonight?" Sarah nodded. "Be careful," he warned. "Tomorrow is the equinox. The boundary between worlds grows thin at such times, and I've heard that young Rebecca's wedding is to take place at the full moon next month, exactly when her cousin's husband died last year." Sarah left the church with the weight of the priest's warnings heavy on her mind. As her carriage climbed the winding road back to the Whitmore estate, the mountains loomed dark against the twilight sky. For the first time since arriving, she wondered if coming here had been a terrible mistake. Dinner at the Whitmore estate was an unexpectedly crowded affair. In addition to Eleanor and Rebecca, Sarah found herself joined by several relatives who had arrived that afternoon. Eleanor's younger sister Victoria and her daughter Constance, Eleanor's brother-in-law Howard Pierce, a widower whose wife, another Whitmore daughter, had died of grief shortly after her husband's accident, and most notably Thomas Grant, Rebecca's fiancé, who had come from Charleston earlier than expected. Thomas was a handsome young man with an open, affable expression that seemed jarringly out of place among the severe Whitmore countenances. He appeared genuinely in love with Rebecca, touching her hand frequently and speaking of their future with enthusiasm. "We'll be living in Charleston after the wedding," Thomas told Sarah, as servants brought out the roast pheasant. "I'm joining my father's law practice. Rebecca's looking forward to city life, aren't you, darling?" Rebecca's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, Thomas, though Mother believes I should maintain a presence at the estate as well." Eleanor cut her meat with precision. "The Whitmore women have responsibilities to the family business, Thomas. Surely you understand that?" Thomas laughed uncomfortably. "Of course, but surely not immediately. We'll want some time to ourselves first." "Time is precious," Victoria commented, her voice carrying a strange undercurrent. "One never knows how much one has." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken only by the clink of silverware on fine china. Sarah noticed Howard Pierce's hand trembling as he reached for his wineglass. "Mr. Pierce," Sarah addressed him directly, "I understand you were married to Eleanor's sister Margaret. May I ask how long ago she passed?" Pierce's face paled. 7 years now, though it feels like yesterday. "And your husband died the year before, is that correct?" Sarah pressed gently. Eleanor's fork clattered against her plate. "Miss Pembroke, this is hardly appropriate dinner conversation." "It's all right, Eleanor," Pierce said quietly. "Yes, Miss Pembroke, William died in a hunting accident 10 months after our wedding. Margaret never recovered from the shock." "What a tragic coincidence," Sarah remarked, watching the faces around the table carefully. Similar to what happened to Victoria's husband and to Eleanor's as well. Thomas looked confused. What is this about? Rebecca mentioned some family tragedies, but nothing to concern yourself with, Rebecca interrupted, squeezing his hand. Miss Pembroke is researching old family histories and has become fixated on unfortunate coincidences. Victoria dabbed her lips with a napkin. Perhaps Miss Pembroke would like to see the family records after dinner. We Whitmores keep meticulous accounts of our history. I'd be most interested, Sarah agreed. As the meal concluded, Victoria led Sarah to the library while the others retired to the drawing room. The library was impressive. 2 stories of leather-bound volumes with a rolling ladder to access the highest shelves. The family journals are kept here, Victoria explained, unlocking a glass-fronted cabinet. Every Whitmore has maintained one since Jeremiah's time. As Victoria pulled out several volumes, Sarah noticed her sleeve pull back, revealing a strange mark on her wrist. What appeared to be a burn or brand in the shape of one of the symbols she'd seen on the chapel doorway. An unusual scar, Sarah commented. Victoria quickly tugged her sleeve down. A childhood accident, nothing of interest. She placed the journals on a reading table. I'll leave you to your research. Alone in the library, Sarah began examining the journals chronologically, starting with Jeremiah Whitmore's. His early entries documented his arrival in Appalachia in 1842 as a poor prospector. Then came an entry from October 1843 that made Sarah's blood run cold. Found the deep cave today. The locals refused to guide me, speaking of mountain spirits and ancient warnings. Nonsense, of course. But there is something peculiar about the rock formations. Coal deposits unlike any I've seen, with strange veins of what appears to be gold or another precious metal running through them. Took samples. At the deepest point, discovered a chamber with markings on the walls. Old symbols, perhaps indigenous. There was a flat stone like an altar in the center. Left an offering, blood from my palm, as a jest to whatever spirits the locals fear. Strangest thing, could have sworn the blood disappeared into the stone itself. The entries that followed documented Jeremiah's rapid rise to wealth as his mining operations struck incredibly rich veins of coal, along with unexpected deposits of gold and other minerals. Then came his courtship and marriage to Elizabeth Hargrove in 1846. Sarah skipped ahead to entries from 1847. After the mansion was built, Elizabeth's sleepwalking worsens. Found her in the mines last night, a quarter-mile down the main shaft. Her nightgown was soiled with coal dust, and her hands were bleeding from clawing at the rock face. She spoke in that strange tongue again. Dr. Morgan suggests it might be a form of somnambulism brought on by pregnancy, but I am not convinced. There is something in her eyes when these episodes occur, something that recognizes me, but is not Elizabeth. The final entry in Jeremiah's journal was from 1848. Elizabeth gave birth to twins today, Eleanor and Victoria. The labor was difficult, but both children appear healthy. More importantly, the episodes have ceased entirely since their birth. It seems the debt has been settled, at least for now. The sacrifice has been accepted. I burn this confession tomorrow and begin a new volume, one that will never mention what truly happened in the deep cave or the bargain I struck. The price for my daughter's prosperity has been set. May God forgive me for binding them to it. The journal ended there. Sarah reached for Eleanor's journal next, finding similar patterns. Documentation of her marriage, followed by her husband's death, and the subsequent prosperity of the mines. The same pattern repeated in the journals of other Whitmore women. Most disturbing were the references to dreams they all seemed to share, dreams of descending into the earth, of standing before something ancient and hungry, of offering it the lives of the men they had married. Sarah was so engrossed in the journals that she didn't hear the library door open. She startled when Rebecca spoke from directly behind her. "Finding what you're looking for, Miss Pembroke?" Sarah turned to find Rebecca standing there, her face unnervingly calm. Your family has quite a history. Every family has its secrets, Rebecca replied. The question is what one does with them once they're discovered. What happened in that cave, Rebecca? What did Jeremiah Whitmore find? Rebecca's expression remained impassive. Something older than Christianity, older than these mountains, perhaps. Something that rewards loyalty and punishes betrayal. And the husbands? They're the sacrifices. They are honored guests, Rebecca corrected, cherished for their contribution to the family's prosperity. Does Thomas know what awaits him? A flash of genuine pain crossed Rebecca's face. I love him, Miss Pembroke. That's the cruelest part of our inheritance. We are bound to love them, to choose them freely. The sacrifice must be real, the loss genuine for the bargain to be kept. Sarah stood, suddenly aware of how isolated she was in this wing of the house. And if one of you refused to marry, refused to sacrifice an innocent man, then all would be lost. Eleanor's voice came from the doorway. She entered with Victoria close behind. The mines would fail. The mountain would take back everything it has given us and more. The debt must be paid, Miss Pembroke. It has always been paid, and it always will be. Sarah looked from face to face, seeing the same resigned determination in each Whitmore woman. I can't let you murder Thomas Grant. You misunderstand your position here, Eleanor said coldly. You were not brought here to expose our family secret. You were brought here as a witness. Tomorrow is the equinox, when we renew our covenant. You will attend the ceremony in the chapel, and you will understand why the Whitmore legacy must continue. And if I refuse? Victoria stepped forward, her eyes gleaming strangely in the lamplight. The mountain always requires a sacrifice, Miss Pembroke, one way or another. Sarah's bedroom door was locked from the outside that night. She had tried reasoning with the Whitmore women, then threatening to expose their secret, but they had simply escorted her to her room with cold determination. Now, as midnight approached, she frantically searched for a way out. The windows were sealed shut, a precaution against the harsh mountain winters, Eleanor had explained earlier with a thin smile. The connecting door to the adjacent guest room was similarly locked. Sarah was contemplating breaking the window with a chair when she noticed something peculiar about the fireplace. Unlike the ornate marble fireplaces in the main rooms, this one was simpler, with large stone blocks forming the surround. As Sarah examined it closer, she noticed that one stone at the back of the firebox appeared to have subtly different coloring than the others. Pressing against it, she felt it give slightly. With growing excitement, Sarah pushed harder and the stone slid inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Servant corridors, she realized. Many large houses had them to allow staff to move through the house unseen. This one appeared disused, thick with dust and cobwebs. Grabbing the oil lamp from her bedside table, Sarah squeezed into the passage. It was cramped but navigable, leading downward via a narrow service stair. She followed it, reasoning that she needed to reach the ground floor to escape the house. The passageway branched several times. Sarah chose paths that continued downward, eventually emerging into what appeared to be the mansion's cellar, a vast space filled with wine racks, storage crates, and root vegetables for the winter. But part of the cellar had been cleared, and Sarah's blood ran cold when she saw what occupied the space. A crude altar made from a flat rock, surrounded by candles and marked with the same symbols she had seen on the chapel doorway. Dark stains marred its surface. A doorway at the far end of the cellar stood ajar, revealing rough-hewn steps descending into darkness. Faint voices echoed from below. Sarah knew she should flee, find an exit, run to town, alert the authorities. But the journalist in her needed to know the full truth. What ceremony were they conducting tonight, and how did it relate to the bargain Jeremiah had made? Dimming her lamp, Sarah crept toward the doorway and began to descend the stairs. They led deep into the earth, the air growing colder and damper with each step. After what seemed like hundreds of steps, the stairway opened into a tunnel that appeared to be part of a natural cave system, with rough walls that had been expanded by human tools. Following the sound of voices, Sarah navigated through the tunnel until she saw light ahead. Extinguishing her own lamp, she crept forward until she could peer into a large cavern. The sight that greeted her would haunt her for the rest of her days. The Whitmore women, Eleanor, Victoria, Rebecca, and Constance, stood in a semicircle around a natural stone formation that resembled the altar in the cellar, but much larger. They wore white nightgowns that appeared almost luminous in the strange greenish light that emanated from cracks in the cave floor. Behind them stood Howard Pierce, his face a mask of resignation. But most shocking was Thomas Grant, who lay on the altar apparently unconscious. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. "The equinox marks the halfway point," Eleanor was saying, her voice taking on a rhythmic, chant-like quality. "The covenant must be renewed. The blood offering must be made to ensure the full sacrifice at the appointed time." Victoria stepped forward with a silver knife. "We offer this blood freely, as Jeremiah offered his, as each generation has offered theirs." To Sarah's horror, Rebecca took the knife and without hesitation drew it across her own palm. Her blood dripped onto Thomas's chest as she spoke words in a language Sarah didn't recognize, the same strange tongue mentioned in Jeremiah's journal. The drops of blood didn't pool on Thomas's shirt, but seemed to soak into his skin, disappearing entirely. His breathing became more labored, and his body twitched, though he remained unconscious. "The mountain accepts your offering," Eleanor intoned. "The covenant is renewed. At the full moon, when they are joined in marriage, the final sacrifice will be prepared." Sarah must have made a sound, because suddenly all eyes turned toward her hiding place. "Our witness has arrived," Victoria said with a cold smile. "Bring her." Before Sarah could flee, Howard Pierce grabbed her from behind. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man his age, and he dragged her into the cavern despite her struggles. "You see now, Miss Pembroke," Eleanor said as Sarah was forced to her knees before the altar. "This is our burden, our duty. What Jeremiah began, we must continue." "You're murdering innocent men," Sarah gasped. "For what? Money? Power?" "For survival," Rebecca corrected, her bleeding hand still extended over Thomas. "The mountain gives us life, but it demands payment. If we break the covenant, it will devour not just our family, but the entire town. The old stories speak of what happened to settlements that angered the mountain spirits, entire communities swallowed by the earth overnight. This isn't just about wealth," Victoria added. "It's about keeping the balance. The mountain allows the miners to take its treasures, but there is always a price." Sarah looked at Thomas's unconscious form. "He loves you, Rebecca. How can you do this to him?" For the first time, Rebecca's composure cracked, tears filling her eyes. "Do you think I want this? I love him more than my life, but my life isn't mine to give. Only his is acceptable to what dwells below." "What dwells below?" Sarah repeated. "What is it you worship here?" Eleanor's eyes gleamed in the eerie light. "Not worship. Appeasement. It was here long before humans came to these mountains. It will be here long after we're gone. It doesn't need our worship, only our acknowledgement of its power and its due." "Digi." As if responding to Eleanor's words, the greenish light from the cracks in the floor intensified. Sarah felt the air pressure change, her ears popping painfully. The stone beneath her knees seemed to vibrate with a deep, subsonic rumble. "It wakes," Victoria whispered, a note of fear in her voice. "The ceremony must be completed." Eleanor approached Sarah, holding the silver knife. "You've uncovered our secret, Miss Pembroke. Now you have a choice. Join us in our covenant. Bind yourself to our purpose, and you may leave this place when the ceremony is complete. Refuse, and the mountain will take you instead of Thomas tonight." "You're insane," Sarah spat. "All of you, generations of murderers hiding behind superstition." "Then see for yourself what we appease," Rebecca said softly. She knelt and pressed her still bleeding palm against one of the glowing cracks in the floor. The rumbling intensified. The cracks widened, the green light pulsating like a heartbeat. and from the widest fissure something began to emerge, a viscous, oily substance that moved with deliberate intelligence, forming tendrils that reached toward the altar. Sarah tried to scream, but terror had frozen her voice. The substance wasn't liquid or solid, but something in between, and it emanated an ancient malevolence that struck Sarah at some primal level. This was what Jeremiah had awakened. This was what had granted the Whitmores their fortune in exchange for regular sacrifices. As the tendrils reached Thomas and began to envelop him, his eyes shot open. He screamed, a sound of pure terror that broke through Sarah's paralysis. With strength born of desperation, she wrenched free from Howard's grip and lunged toward Thomas, grabbing his arm and pulling him away from the creeping tendrils. The substance recoiled momentarily, as if surprised. "Run!" Sarah shouted, dragging the half-conscious Thomas to his feet. "Everyone run!" The cavern shuddered violently. Rocks began to fall from the ceiling as the rumbling grew to a deafening roar. "What have you done?" Eleanor shrieked above the noise. "The covenant is broken. It will take us all." Sarah didn't wait to see more. Supporting Thomas, who was rapidly regaining consciousness, she stumbled toward the tunnel entrance. Behind them, the Whitmore women were scattering as larger rocks crashed down from the ceiling. Victoria fell as a boulder crushed her leg. Her screams were cut short as the floor beneath her cracked open, the strange substance surging upward to envelop her. "What's happening?" Thomas gasped as Sarah pulled him into the tunnel. "Rebecca? Where's Rebecca?" "No time!" Sarah panted, urging him upward toward the stairs. "The whole place is collapsing." But they raced up the stairs, the sounds of destruction growing behind them. Reaching the cellar, they found it too was beginning to crumble, the foundation of the house groaning above them. "This way," Sarah directed, pulling Thomas toward what she hoped was an exit. They stumbled through coal storage rooms and wine cellars, eventually finding a door that led to an exterior bulkhead. As they burst out into the night air, the ground beneath the Witmore estate was visibly undulating, as if something massive was moving beneath it. The mansion's windows shattered one by one, its walls cracking as the foundation shifted. "Rebecca!" Thomas cried, trying to run back toward the house. "She's still in there!" Sarah held him back with all her strength. "You can't help her, nothing can." They watched in horror as the Whitmore mansion began to collapse in on itself, section by section. The east wing went first, then the central portion. The chapel's stone tower crumbled like a child's blocks. All around the estate, the ground was splitting open, revealing glimpses of the same greenish light Sarah had seen in the cavern. "Dear God," Thomas whispered. "What is happening?" "The mountain is taking back what's its," Sarah said, remembering Eleanor's words. "The covenant is broken." By dawn, nothing remained of the Whitmore estate but a massive sinkhole. The authorities from Coalvale arrived to find Sarah and Thomas huddled on a ridge overlooking the destruction. They told a story of an earthquake and a hidden mine shaft beneath the house, a story that was easier to believe than the truth. In the weeks that followed, the Whitmore mines collapsed one by one. Their rich veins of coal and precious metals suddenly inexplicably played out. The family fortune was lost, and with no heirs remaining, for Howard Pierce had also vanished that night, the Whitmore legacy came to an abrupt end. 1 year later, Sarah Penbrook sat at her desk at the Richmond Herald, finalizing the manuscript that would become her first book. The Whitmore tragedy, coal, wealth and ruin in Appalachia, told the official version of events. A wealthy family destroyed when their mansion collapsed into abandoned mine workings during a freak seismic event. The true story remained locked in Sarah's private journal, too fantastic and horrifying to ever be published. She had never told anyone, not even Thomas Grant, about what she had seen in the cavern beneath the Whitmore estate. Some truths were too dangerous to share. Thomas had recovered from his ordeal, though he was left with strange, circular scars on his chest where Rebecca's blood had touched him. He had no memory of being taken to the cavern or of the ceremony, only confused recollections of darkness and terror, and of Rebecca's voice, speaking words he couldn't understand. He had returned to Charleston and his father's law practice, occasionally writing to Sarah with news. His letters never mentioned Rebecca or the Whitmores. Some wounds were too deep to acknowledge. Sarah had just sealed the envelope containing her manuscript when her office door opened, revealing her editor, Mr. Campbell. "Penbrook, you have a visitor," he announced. "Says it's about your Whitmore book." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Who is it?" "Didn't give a name. Older woman, well-dressed. Said she has information you'll want to hear." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed to see the visitor. The woman who entered her office wore an expensive traveling suit and a veiled hat that partially obscured her features. But when she raised the veil, Sarah gasped in recognition. "Mrs. Dawson?" The old woman from Colvale smiled thinly. "You remember me. Good. What are you doing in Richmond?" Sarah asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "Following you, in a manner of speaking," Mrs. Dawson replied, seating herself without invitation. "I've been watching your career with interest since the Whitmore incident. Your newspaper articles have carefully avoided certain aspects of what happened that night." "I reported the facts," Sarah said defensively. "You reported what people could accept," Mrs. Dawson corrected. "A wise decision. But now you're publishing a book, and I needed to ensure you maintain that wisdom." "Are you threatening me?" The old woman laughed. "Protecting you, Miss Penbrook, and others. What awakened beneath the Whitmore estate hasn't gone back to sleep. It's merely relocated." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" "The covenant wasn't broken, merely transferred," Mrs. Dawson explained. "The Whitmore line ended, but the obligation continues. The mountain must still be appeased." "By whom?" Mrs. Dawson's eyes glittered strangely. "By those who were present when the old bargain ended and the new one began. By those who witnessed and survived." Sarah stood abruptly. "I want you to leave now." "Of course," Mrs. Dawson said, rising smoothly. "I've delivered my message. But before I go, you might want to know that Thomas Grant is engaged again. The wedding is set for October, almost exactly a year since the night at the Whitmore estate." Sarah's heart pounded painfully in her chest. "How do you know that?" "I know many things, Miss Penbrook. Just as I know you've been having dreams of descending into the earth, of standing before something ancient and hungry." Mrs. Dawson smiled at Sarah's shocked expression. "Yes, it's chosen you both. The covenant continues through new bloodlines now." "I don't believe you," Sarah whispered. "It's over. The Whitmore curse died with them." "Curses don't die, Miss Penbrook. They evolve." Mrs. Dawson moved to the door, then paused. "You'll receive an invitation to Thomas's wedding soon. I suggest you attend. After all, witnesses are an important part of the covenant." After Mrs. Dawson left, Sarah sat trembling at her desk, her completed manuscript suddenly seeming like a mockery. The old woman was right about the dreams, vivid nightmares that had plagued Sarah since that night. Dreams of the cavern, of the altar, of blood offerings and ancient hungers. She pulled out the bottom drawer of her desk, removing a small wooden box she kept locked at all times. Inside was a single item, a fragment of stone she had grabbed from the altar in the cavern as she and Thomas fled. 3 weeks after Mrs. Dawson's unsettling visit, a cream-colored envelope arrived at Sarah's desk. The return address was from Charleston, and she recognized Thomas's handwriting immediately. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal and withdrew the contents. The wedding invitation was elegant, printed on heavy cardstock with gold embossing. "Mr. Thomas Grant and Miss Catherine Moore request the honor of your presence at their marriage ceremony." The date was indeed set for October 17th. 1 year and 3 days after the collapse of the Whitmore estate. Enclosed was a personal note from Thomas. "Dear Sarah, I hope this finds you well. I know we haven't corresponded in some months, and for that I apologize. The events of last year left wounds that have taken time to heal. I've found happiness again with Catherine. She is kind and gentle, everything I need to move forward from the past. I would be honored if you would attend our wedding. Few understand what I experienced that night, and having you there would mean a great deal. There is also a matter of some importance I wish to discuss with you. I've been experiencing strange dreams that I can't explain. Dreams of darkness and ancient things. Sometimes I wake with the taste of coal dust in my mouth, though I've not been near a mine since that night. Perhaps it's merely the mind's way of processing trauma, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me from that place. Something unseen. I will understand if you choose not to come, but I hope you will. Your friend, Thomas Sarah, read the letter 3 times, her unease growing with each reading. The dreams Thomas described mirrored her own too closely for comfort, and the timing of the wedding, so close to the anniversary, couldn't be coincidence. Mrs. Dawson's words echoed in her mind. The covenant continues through new bloodlines now. She pulled out the stone fragment from her desk drawer, examining it in the afternoon light. She had convinced herself it was just an ordinary piece of rock, a meaningless souvenir of a traumatic night. But now, looking more closely, she could see faint traces of the same symbols that had been carved into the chapel doorway at the Whitmore estate. A knock at her office door startled her. "Come in," she called, quickly returning the stone to its box. Mr. Campbell entered, looking troubled. "Sarah, there's been an inquiry about your Whitmore book. A lawyer from Charleston, Hargrove and Associates. They're claiming prior interest in the subject matter." Sarah frowned. "That's absurd. The Whitmore family is gone." "Nevertheless, they've requested a meeting, and there's something else." Campbell hesitated. "The name Hargrove, it appears in your manuscript. Elizabeth Hargrove was Jeremiah Whitmore's wife, correct?" A chill ran through Sarah. "Yes, before she married Jeremiah, her family name was Hargrove." "Well, it seems the law firm has some connection. They mentioned having family records that might complicate your narrative." After Campbell left, Sarah sat motionless, her mind racing. Elizabeth Hargrove's family. The covenant hadn't been Jeremiah's alone. It had involved both bloodlines from the beginning. What if the Hargroves had been party to the original bargain? What if they still maintained their connection to whatever dwelled beneath the mountains? With sudden resolve, Sarah opened her desk drawer and removed a sheet of stationery. She penned a quick response to Thomas. "Dear Thomas, I will attend your wedding. There are matters we must discuss before you proceed with the ceremony. Do not speak of your dreams to anyone else, especially not to Catherine or her family. I will arrive in Charleston 3 days before the wedding. Meet me at the Magnolia Hotel at 2 p.m. on October 14th. Come alone. Be careful, Thomas. I believe we are both in grave danger. Your friend, Sarah." As she sealed the envelope, Sarah made a decision. She could not publish her book, not yet. Not until she understood what had truly happened at the Whitmore estate and what connection it might have to Thomas's upcoming marriage. She would go to Charleston, but not just as a wedding guest. She would go as an investigator, determined to break whatever covenant still bound them to the darkness beneath the mountains. Charleston in October was beautiful, its historic streets lined with trees turning golden and crimson. But Sarah found no joy in the autumn splendor as her train pulled into the station on the afternoon of October 14th. Her journey had been plagued by nightmares more vivid than ever before. Dreams of descending endless staircases into the earth, of standing before a pulsating darkness that spoke to her in a language she somehow understood. She had awoken each morning with the taste of coal dust in her mouth and faint smudges on her fingertips, as if she had been digging in her sleep. The Magnolia Hotel was one of Charleston's finest establishments, a 4-story brick building with white columns and wrought-iron balconies. Sarah checked into her room and then went directly to the lobby to wait for Thomas, arriving 15 minutes before their appointed meeting time. The hotel's grandfather clock had just struck 2 when she saw him enter. Thomas Grant looked simultaneously better and worse than when she'd last seen him. He had regained the weight he'd lost after the Whitmore tragedy, and his clothing spoke of prosperity. But there were new lines around his eyes, and a haunted quality to his gaze that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," he said, taking her hands in his, "thank God you came. Let's not talk here," she replied quietly. "Is there somewhere private we can go?" Thomas nodded. "There's a tea room upstairs with private parlours. I've reserved one." Once they were seated in a small parlour with the door closed, Thomas visibly relaxed. "I wasn't sure you'd come. After everything that happened, your letter concerned me," Sarah said. "Tell me about these dreams." Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he poured tea. "They started about 3 months ago. At first, just fragments, darkness, the sensation of descending, voices speaking words I couldn't understand. But they've grown more detailed, more real." "Oh, what happens in them?" "I'm in a cave, standing before what looks like an altar made of stone. There's something else there, something I can't quite see, but I can feel its presence. It speaks to me, and somehow I understand what it wants." Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. "It wants me to bring others to it, to feed it." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Others? Who?" "Catherine," Thomas admitted, looking ashamed. "My fiancée. In the dreams I lead her to the altar and He couldn't continue. "And the most disturbing part," Sarah prompted gently, "is that in the dreams you want to do this. You feel compelled." Thomas looked up sharply. "How did you know?" "Because I've had the same dreams, Thomas. Not about Catherine, but about the altar, about the entity that dwells below." "What's happening to us?" Thomas asked, his voice breaking. "Is it some kind of shared trauma? Some psychological aftermath of what we experienced?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I believe it's more than that. I think whatever was beneath the Whitmore estate, whatever they made their covenant with, has followed us. It's chosen us to continue what the Whitmores began." She explained what she had learned about the Whitmore family's bargain, about Jeremiah's original encounter in the caves, and about Mrs. Dawson's visit to her office. "But that's insane," Thomas protested. "Some kind of mountain spirit demanding sacrifices. This is 1892, Sarah, not the Dark Ages." "I know how it sounds," Sarah replied, "but you were there that night. You saw what happened when the covenant was broken. And now, these dreams." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "There's something I haven't told you," he finally said, "about Catherine, about her family." Sarah felt a chill. "What about them?" "Her mother's maiden name was Hargrove. The family has connections to these mountains going back generations. They own several coal mines near where the Whitmore estate stood." "And you met her 3 months ago, right when the dreams started." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "It was so sudden. I wasn't looking to court anyone, not after Rebecca. But Catherine appeared at a social function, and there was this immediate connection, as if we were meant to find each other." Sarah remembered what Eleanor had said in the cavern. "We are bound to love them, to choose them freely. The sacrifice must be real, the loss genuine for the bargain to be kept." "Thomas, I don't think you should go through with this wedding," she said firmly. "Call it off." "I can't do that. Catherine would be devastated. Her family has invested so much in the preparations, and despite these dreams, I do love her, Sarah." "That's exactly what concerns me," Sarah replied grimly. "The pattern is repeating itself. You're being positioned as the sacrifice, just as all the Whitmore sons-in-law were. The covenant continues, just with different bloodlines now." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "Even if what you're saying has any basis in reality, what can we do? How does one fight something like this?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted, "but the first step is to learn more about the Hargrove family and their connection to the Whitmores. And we need to find out if there are caves beneath Charleston similar to those under the Whitmore estate." "The Hargroves own a summer home outside the city," Thomas said slowly. "Catherine mentioned that it has extensive cellars dating back to colonial times. The wedding is being held there." Sarah felt her skin prickle with gooseflesh. "When was the house built?" 1843, I believe. Catherine said it was constructed by her great-grandfather after he made his fortune in coal." "The same year Jeremiah Whitmore found the cave," Sarah whispered. "Thomas, I need to see that house before the wedding. Can you arrange it?" Thomas hesitated. "Catherine has invited me to dinner there tomorrow evening. Her parents want to discuss some details of the ceremony. I could bring you as my guest, as a friend from Richmond who's arrived early for the wedding." "That would be perfect," Sarah agreed. "But Thomas, be careful. Don't let on what we suspect. And whatever you do, don't be alone with Catherine, especially not anywhere near those cellars." After Thomas left, Sarah returned to her hotel room and opened her traveling case. Beneath her clothes lay a leather-bound book she had purchased from an antiquarian in Richmond, a treatise on Appalachian folk magic and mountain spirits written in 1823. She had been studying it in the weeks since Mrs. Dawson's visit, looking for any information that might help her understand what they were facing. One passage had particularly caught her attention. The oldest tales speak of a being that dwelled in the deep places of the mountains long before humans came to these lands. The Cherokee called it the hunger that walks in darkness, and left offerings at certain cave entrances to appease it. Early settlers who ignored these warnings often found their communities plagued by disappearances and mysterious collapses of the earth. It is said that this entity can be bound through blood covenants, granting prosperity and protection to those who serve it faithfully. But such bargains require regular sacrifices, willing souls given to feed its endless hunger. Most troubling are accounts suggesting that once such a covenant is established, it cannot truly be broken, only transferred to new bloodlines when the original line fails in its obligations. The only known method of banishment requires the combined blood of all bloodlines involved in the covenant, freely given at the place where the original bargain was struck during the dark of the moon when the boundary between worlds is thinnest. Sarah closed the book, her mind racing. If the Hargroves were indeed part of the original covenant with the Whitmores, then both bloodlines would be needed for any attempt at banishment. But the original site of the bargain, the deep cave beneath the Whitmore estate, was now inaccessible, buried beneath tons of collapsed earth, unless there was another access point, another cave connected to the same underground system, perhaps beneath the very house where Thomas was to be married in 3 days' time. The Hargrove estate lay 10 miles outside Charleston, set amid rolling hills that were a gentler echo of the Appalachian Mountains to the west. As Thomas's carriage approached the property the following evening, Sarah was struck by certain similarities to the Whitmore mansion. The imposing stone gates, the long drive lined with ancient oaks, and the sense of old money and older secrets. The house itself was Georgian in style, with symmetrical wings extending from a central block and tall columns supporting a triangular pediment over the entrance. Stone urns decorated the roofline, and mullioned windows reflected the sunset in shades of amber and crimson. "It's beautiful," Sarah commented, trying to mask her unease. "Catherine says it's been in her family for generations," Thomas replied, "though they only use it for summers and special occasions now. They maintain a townhouse in Charleston for everyday use." As they stepped down from the carriage, the front door opened to reveal a young woman in a pale blue evening dress. Catherine Moore was undeniably beautiful, with fair skin, auburn hair, and a graceful bearing that spoke of careful upbringing. But what struck Sarah most forcefully was her resemblance to Rebecca Whitmore, not in specific features, but in a certain quality of serene detachment that seemed to hover just beneath her pleasant smile. "Thomas, darling," Catherine called, descending the steps to embrace him. She turned to Sarah with polite curiosity. "And you must be Miss Pembroke. Thomas has told me so much about your adventures together last year." "Has he indeed?" Sarah replied, wondering exactly how much Thomas had shared. "Only that you were both caught in that terrible mine collapse at the Whitmore estate," Catherine assured her, taking Sarah's arm as they climbed the steps. "How fortunate that you both escaped. I understand the entire family perished." "Yes," Sarah said carefully, "a tragic accident." The interior of the Hargrove house was elegantly appointed, with imported furnishings and artwork that spoke of considerable wealth. Catherine led them through a grand foyer into a drawing room where an older couple waited. "Miss Pembroke, may I present my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Moore," Catherine said. "Mother, father, this is Miss Sarah Pembroke, the journalist friend of Thomas's I mentioned." Mrs. Moore was a handsome woman in her 50s, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, but still arranged in an elaborate style. She extended her hand to Sarah with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Miss Pembroke, how interesting to meet a female journalist, and from Richmond, I understand." "Yes, ma'am, I write for the Herald." "And you're working on a book about the Whitmore tragedy, I believe?" Mr. Moore interjected. He was a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, dressed in an expensive suit that emphasized his considerable girth. A fascinating subject. Sarah felt a flicker of alarm. She hadn't mentioned her book to Thomas in their correspondence. "Yes, though the project is currently on hold." "A wise decision," Mrs. Moore commented. "Some stories are perhaps better left untold." Before Sarah could respond, a butler announced that dinner was served. The dining room continued the theme of understated opulence, with a table that could seat 20, though only 5 places, were set at one end. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over silver place settings and fresh flower arrangements. As the first course was served, a delicate mushroom soup, Mr. Moore turned the conversation to wedding preparations. "Everything is in order for Saturday," he assured Thomas. "The minister will arrive at 3 for the rehearsal, and the ceremony will begin promptly at 6. We've arranged for lanterns along the garden paths for after the service, as the sun sets early this time of year." "It sounds wonderful," Thomas replied, though Sarah noticed he merely stirred his soup rather than eating it. "Tell me, Miss Pembroke," Mrs. Moore said, "how did you come to report on the Whitmore incident? It seems an unusual assignment for a woman." "I specialize in historical features," Sarah explained. "The Whitmore family's long association with the coal industry made them a natural subject of interest." "Indeed," Mr. Moore nodded, "though their business practices were somewhat questionable, not like the Hargrove approach." "The Hargroves?" Sarah asked innocently. "Are they another mining family?" "My wife's family," Mr. Moore explained. "The Hargroves have operated mines in Western Virginia and parts of West Virginia since the 1840s. Catherine's great-grandfather, Edward Hargrove, was the first to recognize the potential of the region." "Around the same time as Jeremiah Whitmore," Sarah noted. A momentary tension fell over the table. Mrs. Moore set down her spoon with a careful precision. "Yes, though the two men had very different methods. Jeremiah Whitmore was known for his aggressive expansion. Edward believed in a more sustainable approach." "Sustainable," Sarah pressed. "He understood that one must give back to the land if one takes from it," Mrs. Moore said cryptically, "a philosophy our family has maintained through the generations." Throughout the meal, Sarah observed subtle exchanges between Catherine and her mother, glances that seemed to communicate unspoken messages. Once, when Catherine excused herself briefly, Mrs. Moore followed, and Sarah could have sworn she heard urgent whispers from the hallway. After dinner, Mr. Moore suggested a tour of the grounds before darkness fell completely. "The gardens are still lovely, even in October," he said. "And I understand you have an interest in architecture, Miss Pembroke." "Indeed," Sarah replied, seizing the opportunity, "especially historical foundations and cellars. I understand this house has quite extensive ones?" Something flickered in Mr. Moore's eyes, caution perhaps, or calculation. "Yes, though I'm afraid they're rather damp and unpleasant this time of year. Perhaps another visit." As they walked the manicured paths, Sarah noticed stone structures at regular intervals, small, shrine-like constructions that might have been mistaken for decorative follies by a casual observer, but each bore subtle markings carved into the lintels, symbols similar to those she had seen at the Whitmore estate. "What interesting garden features," she commented. "They appear quite old." "Family traditions," Mrs. Moore said dismissively. "Catherine's great-grandmother was interested in European garden design. These are based on classical temples." When they returned to the house, the evening was drawing to a close. As they prepared to depart, Catherine pressed a small package into Thomas's hands. "A gift for you, darling," she said. "Open it when you're alone. It's a tradition in my family for the bride to give her groom a token before the wedding." Thomas tucked the package into his coat pocket with a smile. "I'll treasure it, whatever it is." As their carriage pulled away from the Hargrove estate, Sarah waited until they were well beyond the gates before speaking. "Thomas, you mustn't open that package," she said urgently. "What? Why not?" "Everything about this evening has confirmed my suspicions. The Moores, or rather the Hargroves, are connected to whatever happened at the Whitmore estate. Those garden structures bear the same symbols I saw in the Whitmore chapel, and Mrs. Moore's comments about giving back to the land." Thomas looked troubled. "Even if you're right, what harm could a small gift do?" "I don't know, but I'm not willing to take the risk. Whatever is happening here, Catherine is clearly part of it, willingly or not." Thomas was silent for a long moment, then slowly withdrew the package from his pocket. It was wrapped in silk and tied with a ribbon. "What should I do with it?" "Let me see it," Sarah said. When Thomas hesitated, she added, "I won't open it. I just want to examine the wrapping." He handed it to her reluctantly. The package was small and surprisingly heavy for its size. The silk wrapping was decorated with subtle embroidery. More of the strange symbols, Sarah realized. She returned it to Thomas. "Keep it wrapped. Tomorrow we need to find out more about the connection between the Hargroves and the Whitmores, and we need to investigate what lies beneath the Hargrove estate." "How? We can't exactly ask to explore their cellars." Sarah's expression was grim. "No, but there might be another way in." The following morning, Sarah visited the Charleston Historical Society, where she pored over old maps and property records. What she discovered confirmed her growing suspicions. The land where the Hargrove estate now stood had once been part of a larger property that included several small caves noted in early surveys. More importantly, geological maps showed a limestone formation extending from these caves in the direction of the former Whitmore lands, suggesting the possibility of an extensive underground cave system connecting both properties. Meeting Thomas for lunch at a small cafe, she shared her findings. "The caves were sealed off when the house was built," she explained, "but they're still there beneath the estate, and I believe they connect to the same system that ran beneath the Whitmore property." "Even if you're right," Thomas said, looking pale, "what does it mean for us? For the wedding?" "I think the ceremony is meant to renew the covenant," Sarah said bluntly, "with you as the sacrifice, just as the Whitmore sons-in-law were. The timing, almost exactly a year after the collapse, can't be coincidence." Thomas pushed his untouched food away. "I had another dream last night," he admitted. "After I got back to my rooms, I dreamed I was in a cave, standing before an altar. Catherine was there, and her mother and other women I didn't recognize. They were chanting, and I was willing. I wanted to lie on that altar." He looked up at Sarah, his eyes haunted. "What's happening to me?" "The entity is influencing you," Sarah said. "It needs a willing sacrifice. That's why you feel drawn to Catherine, why you feel you love her despite barely knowing her. So what do we do? I can't just disappear. The wedding is tomorrow." Sarah leaned forward. "We need to break the covenant permanently. According to the book I've been studying, that requires the blood of all bloodlines involved in the original bargain, freely given at the place where the bargain was struck, during the dark of the moon." "Which is when?" "Tonight," Sarah said. "There's no moon tonight, but the original cave is inaccessible now. We need to find another access point to the same system." "The Hargrove cellars," Thomas realized. Sarah nodded. We need to get into that house tonight and find the entrance to the caves. And we need a Hargrove, Catherine most likely, to willingly give blood along with us." "That's impossible," Thomas protested. "Even if we could get into the house undetected, why would Catherine help us break a covenant her family has apparently maintained for generations?" "Because I don't think she wants to be part of it either," Sarah said. "I watched her last night. There were moments when the mask slipped, when her mother wasn't looking. I saw fear in her eyes, Thomas. I think she's as trapped in this as the Whitmore women were." "So we what? Break into the Hargrove estate tonight and try to convince Catherine to help us perform some kind of blood ritual in their cellars? This is madness, Sarah." "Do you have a better idea?" Sarah challenged. "Because in less than 24 hours you'll be married to Catherine, and then the covenant will be sealed with your life." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "There's a servant's entrance on the east side of the house," he finally said. "Catherine showed me the grounds yesterday before you arrived. The door leads to a back staircase near the kitchen, and there's a passage from there to the cellars. The family retires early. By 10 o'clock the house should be quiet." "Good," Sarah said. "And I have this." She withdrew a small revolver from her handbag, a precaution. "I don't intend to use it, but after what happened at the Witmore estate—" They spent the afternoon preparing. Sarah purchased lanterns, matches, rope, and a small knife for the blood ritual. Thomas drew a rough map of the Hargrove estate based on what he had seen during his visits. By nightfall, they were ready. The night was moonless and unusually warm for October, with low clouds obscuring the stars and muffling sound. Their carriage dropped them a quarter-mile from the estate gates, and they proceeded on foot, keeping to the shadows of the trees that lined the long drive. The house was mostly dark, with only a few windows still illuminated on the upper floors. They circled around to the east side, where the servants' entrance stood partially concealed by a trellis of climbing roses. "It should be unlocked," Thomas whispered. "The kitchen staff comes and goes early." Sure enough, the door opened with only the faintest creak. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow passage that led past the darkened kitchen toward the main part of the house. Oil lamps turned low provided just enough light to navigate. "The cellar door is this way," Thomas said, leading Sarah down a corridor lined with pantries and storage rooms. At the end was a heavy wooden door secured with an iron latch. It opened to reveal stone steps descending into darkness. They lit their lanterns before starting down, the yellow light casting long shadows on the rough stone walls. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper as they descended, carrying a faint mineral scent that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of the cavern beneath the Whitmore estate. The main cellar was extensive, divided into sections for wine storage, preserved foods, and household supplies. But Thomas led Sarah past these areas to a far corner where another, older-looking door stood partially hidden behind stacked crates. "I noticed this yesterday," he explained. "Catherine was showing me where the wine for the wedding was stored, and I caught a glimpse of this door when she wasn't looking." The door was locked, but the old padlock yielded to persistent work with a hairpin from Sarah's collection. Beyond lay another staircase, this one cruder and clearly much older than the main cellar steps. "These must date from before the house was built," Sarah whispered as they began to descend. "Maybe part of an original structure on the property." The stairs seemed to go on much longer than should have been possible, carrying them deep beneath the Hargrove estate. The air grew increasingly stale, the mineral smell stronger, until finally they emerged into a large chamber hewn partly from natural rock and partly by human hands. Sarah's lantern revealed a sight that made her blood run cold. The chamber was arranged exactly like the cavern beneath the Whitmore estate, a natural stone formation serving as an altar, surrounded by smaller stones placed in a precise pattern, and on the walls the same symbols she had seen before, carved into the living rock. "It's the same," she breathed, "the same entity, the same covenant." "What now?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with tension. "We still need Catherine, and we have no way to—" I knew you would come." They whirled to find Catherine standing at the foot of the stairs, a lamp in her hand. She wore a white nightgown, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. In the lamplight, her resemblance to Rebecca Whitmore was even more pronounced. "Catherine," Thomas said, recovering first. "How did you know we'd be here?" "I've been having dreams," she said simply. "Dreams of you both coming here to the deep place. Dreams of breaking the chain that has bound my family for generations." She moved closer, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Is it true? Can it really be broken?" Sarah studied the young woman carefully. "You know about the covenant? About what it demands?" Catherine nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I've known since I was a girl. The Hargrove women are taught young what our duty is. When the Whitmore line ended last year, my mother said it was our turn to take up the full burden, that I must marry and sacrifice my husband to appease what dwells below." "And you went along with this?" Thomas asked incredulously. "I had no choice," Catherine replied, "or so I believed. But then the dreams began, dreams of you both, and of freedom from the covenant. I think it wants to be released as much as we do." "It?" Sarah questioned. "The entity beneath the mountain?" Catherine's gaze dropped to the stone floor. "It was never a spirit, not really. It's something older, something that was here before humans came to these lands. My great-grandmother wrote in her journal that it was lonely, that it bound itself to our families out of a desire for connection as much as hunger." "Connection through sacrifice?" Sarah said skeptically. "The sacrifice was Jeremiah's idea," Catherine explained. "Edward Hargrove, my great-grandfather, found the cave first. He communed with the entity, learned its nature. It fed on emotional energy, on connection. Jeremiah Witmore twisted that need into something darker, a demand for blood sacrifice in exchange for wealth." "And now you want to help us break this covenant?" Thomas asked. "What about your family, the mines?" "The mines are nearly played out," Catherine said. "My father has other investments, and she looked directly at Thomas. "I don't want to be a murderer. I don't want to sacrifice someone I've been compelled to love." Sarah felt a surge of hope. "The book I found says we need the blood of all bloodlines involved in the original covenant, freely given at the place where the bargain was struck." "This is that place," Catherine confirmed. "The Hargrove Cave. This is where Edward first communed with the entity, where Jeremiah later came to make his darker bargain. Both bloodlines were present, Whitmore and Hargrove." "But the Whitmore line is extinct," Thomas pointed out. "Not entirely," said a new voice from the shadows. They turned to see Mrs. Dawson emerge from a side passage Sarah hadn't noticed before. But she looked different now, younger somehow, her back straighter, her eyes clearer. "Mrs. Dawson?" Sarah gasped. "What are you doing here?" "My real name is Margaret Whitmore," the woman said. "I never died, as Howard Pierce was led to believe. I fled the estate after my husband's death, unwilling to continue the cycle of sacrifice. I've been watching, waiting for a chance to break the covenant that has bound my family for too long." "You're Eleanor's sister," Sarah realized. "The one who supposedly died of grief." Margaret nodded. "I found refuge with a family in Colvale who helped me change my identity. I've lived as Mrs. Dawson for 7 years, but I've never stopped looking for a way to end what my grandfather began." "Then we have representatives of both bloodlines," Sarah said, hope rising in her chest. "We can break the covenant tonight." "Yes," Margaret agreed. "But the ritual must be performed precisely, and we must hurry. My presence here won't go unnoticed for long. Victoria's daughter Constance survived the collapse as well. She married into the Moore family last year. She's Catherine's aunt by marriage now. She'll have sensed my arrival." "What do we do?" Thomas asked. Margaret approached the altar. "We each make a small cut. Let our blood mingle on the stone. Then we recite the words of breaking, the reversal of the binding Jeremiah and Edward created." As Margaret prepared the ritual, Sarah noticed a change in the atmosphere of the cave. The air seemed to thicken, and the mineral scent grew stronger. The symbols carved into the walls began to emit a faint greenish glow, the same unearthly light she had seen beneath the Whitmore estate. "It knows," Catherine whispered. "It knows what we intend." "Is it angry?" Thomas asked. "Not angry," Catherine replied. "Afraid. It fears being alone again." Margaret handed the ritual knife to Sarah. "You first. You were a witness to the breaking of the old covenant. Now you must help forge the new one, not of bondage but of release." Sarah took the knife and made a small cut across her palm, letting the blood drip onto the altar stone. Thomas followed, then Catherine, and finally Margaret. Their blood mingled on the stone, which seemed to absorb it just as the altar beneath the Whitmore estate had done. "Now the words," Margaret instructed, and began to recite in the same strange language Sarah had heard Eleanor use in the cavern. The others joined in, Catherine clearly familiar with the words, Sarah and Thomas stumbling but managing to follow. As they spoke, the greenish light grew stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air vibrated with energy, and Sarah felt a pressure building in her ears. The stone beneath their feet began to tremble. "Keep going," Margaret urged, as dust and small rocks showered down from the ceiling. "The covenant is breaking." They continued the chant, their voices rising above the growing rumble of the earth. The symbols on the walls flared brilliantly, then began to fade, as if being erased by an invisible hand. Suddenly, a scream of rage echoed through the chamber. Sarah turned to see Constance Moore, formerly Whitmore, standing at the entrance to the side passage, her face contorted with fury. "Traitors!" she shrieked, lurching toward them. "You would destroy everything! The covenant must be maintained!" Before she could reach them, the floor between them cracked, a fissure opening that stopped Constance in her tracks. From the crack rose a tendril of the same viscous, oily substance Sarah had seen beneath the Whitmore estate. But this time it didn't reach for them hungrily. Instead it hovered in the air, almost hesitantly. "It's asking for our choice," Catherine said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's giving us the chance to set it free." The tendril moved toward the altar, touching the mingled blood. A sound filled the chamber, not a voice exactly, but a vibration that resolved into meaning in Sarah's mind. Release or renewal? "Release," Sarah said firmly. "No more sacrifices, no more blood debt." The others echoed her, even as Constance continued to scream denials from across the widening fissure. The tendril withdrew into the crack, and for a moment, nothing happened.